Welcome to American Issues Take One on ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Jay Fidell. Today we'll talk about Trump, Vance, and the ambush of Zelensky and how it has backfired. Was it a pre-planned attempt to delegitimize the president of Ukraine? Our co-host for the show is Ben Davis, emeritus professor of law at the University of Toledo and visiting professor at the Washington and Lee Law School. Our guest for the show is Chuck Crumpton. Welcome to the show, you guys. You know, Trump and Vance showed the world who they want to support in Ukraine. And it's not Ukraine. Russian media reporting about the White House meeting was gleeful about Trump and Vance's attack on Zelensky. And where did this go? What does it mean? So let me go to you first, Ben. How did it come out at the end of that meeting, if you will, a diplomatic meeting, if you will? How did Trump come out? How did Vance come out? How did Rubio come out sitting next to him? And how did Zelensky come out?
I think if we take all four of them together, they came out as having shocked the world. This was a scene you never see. I think there was one commentator who said that in their entire 10, 20, 30, 40, however many years, had they ever seen anything like that. Obviously, there are disputes that go on behind closed doors. You read about them in histories, but that kind of live critique was amazing. So how did Trump come off? Trump came off as, I think the fair thing to say, as being completely beholden to the Russians, taking the Russian position. It's like the ally you didn't want to have. You know, it's like the worst thing to have is the United States as an enemy, and even worse thing to have is the United States as your friend, right? So I think that's the way he came off, and you can see also, at least in the way he was acting with Zelensky, the kind of brutality that he can probably be like in private, because you sometimes wonder why all these people bend the knee to him. Probably because he is really quite brutal in private, and like most normally constituted human beings, they really want to avoid brutality. If we take our friend Vance, JD Vance, he actually seemed a little sort of snide, sneaky, immature. I mean, he's only 40 odd years old, trying to in the way that he talked to Zelensky, the head of state. And even there's some other people in the room who were complaining about what Zelensky was wearing. That is really childish. It's childish. Now, maybe he was there in a role to provoke Zelensky, but the thing that really struck me about Vance was his complete ignorance of the actual matters on the ground there. For example, that there had been ceasefires before that Russia had broken. He seemed like he was totally surprised by that. It's like, who's briefing these people? Who are? This is pretty basic stuff. Or that, this all started in 2014, right? With Crimea. Didn't they know? It's not just 2 years ago, right? You know what I mean? Or even if you want to go back, let's go back to, Stalin and the Holodomor and all the stuff that happened when with the collectivization of farms in Ukraine and all that. There's like heavy, really dark history that, here's this. Doesn't anybody brief these people? On this, or maybe they're just not interested. But I was really wondering whether there were actually people who knew this history, to brief, or thought it would be interesting too, even a couple of bullet points. All right. So he just seemed really quite immature, I thought. He's provoking, okay, and he knows how to play Trump, but ultimately he seemed kind of immature. what's the next guy? Rubio. Oh, Rubio. Rubio looked like, crestfallen, quite honestly, but, he didn't say a word. I mean, what is he going to do? He's watching this thing blow up and probably thinking in his head, okay, so what's the next thing I got to do to whatever I'm supposed to do next in this thing? The argument was made that the whole idea of the signing of the particular agreement on the minerals was that there'd be a business interest, which Trump likes, in Ukraine, right? So that would be the way you get to security for Ukraine, because there's some money to be made by Trump and his friends in Ukraine. That I understand was the logic, but it all blew up. As to Zelensky, there are people who are saying that he wasn't well briefed. I've heard that, and that unlike the head of the Prime Minister of England or Macron, that he didn't play the game of buttering up Trump in the way that they did. And so there's a part of you that says, yeah, you could have played it maybe a little better, but this guy's in the middle of a war, right? Okay. And there's you're standing there as the head of a democratically elected country, and people are saying really stupid things to you. And I could understand him kind of just going, hey, I need your help, and please help us, but I'm not going to bend the knee. I'm not that guy. You want that guy, you go with somebody else, but I am not bending the knee here. And no, put it more prosaically, Ukraine is not bending the knee. Ukraine, we got too many people who fought and died. That was the feeling that came from him. And the emotion, I mean, the almost immediate emotion across Europe of solidarity with him, across the world of the shock at, sort of the petulance of Trump, and the glee in Moscow, were all these kind of things that were saying, gee, there are plates moving, but the United States is not looking real good in all this, okay? I mean, the kind of thing that the analogy I heard people make would be that Churchill would be on the phone with Roosevelt, and Roosevelt would say to Churchill, look, you got to cut a deal with Hitler or we're going to stop Lend-Lease, okay? And, just to imagine that kind of reality was quite something. So I did, however, since I'm teaching a negotiation class, I did tell students that they should study the video that's like 52 minutes. And the second year students should maybe write a paper about what, all the negotiation theory and stuff that us ADR types do to analyze, what happened there. I happen to have one student who's actually got family who's from Ukraine in my class. He's American, and but parents are from Ukraine. And it's a really hard time for a lot of people here who support Ukraine to have essentially 80% of the American people who are supporting Ukraine, and to have a president who seems to be in the pocket of Putin, a war criminal, a horrific person. So in sum, I guess I would say Trump not so good, Vance incompetent, Rubio just kind of trying to figure out his next move, and Zelensky is a good guy in a bad spot. That was that way it felt, Maybe that's the way. I don't know if that helps.
Well, let me go to Chuck on the mediation point. A lot of people, Chuck, have said that this was a setup. It was an ambush, and that Trump set it up, with the press and make that the conservative press, and all those people in the room, live television. And I don't think that Zelensky knew it was going to be set up that way. So I guess the first question I would put to you is, was this an ambush? Or was this a setup? And assuming one way or the other, what's your reaction as a mediator, like Ben?
So it's a really good question, and it goes so many productive places. Why does Trump need two other more verbal, smarter people, if they are, in the room? He's aware of his mental decline. He's aware of his verbal decline. He needs protection in case he's not able to assert himself successfully against Zelensky. And I don't see anyone in the press saying that he did, that Trump won that debate in any sense. Ben is exactly right. Vance's historical incompetence made him useless for exactly the purpose he was there for, which was to be Trump's attack dog. But an ineffective attack dog is not helpful. It just demonstrates the weakness of the principle that you're acting as the agent for. And Rubio, probably the smartest of those three, kept absolutely silent. He was not going to put his feet anywhere around his mouth or open it to let that happen, which is a good reflection of how he perceived the historical ignorance of Vance and the mental and verbal deficiencies of Trump. Zelensky wound up, yeah, he got tricked into an ambush, all right. But he wound up standing up for his people. And there are people in the press that have attacked that for letting himself be maneuvered into that position. It's not the point. The point is, who is he? Who is he representing? And he was true to his constituency. The only one of the three who was true to his constituency throughout. He was more historically aware than Vance. He said, look, ceasefire is fine. We're for that. If mineral rights need to be a part of this because Trump's a transactional negotiator, everything's a trade-off, and it's a quantitatively identifiable and measured trade-off. He's not a relationship negotiator. He doesn't have relationships. And none of them last because eventually the people fail to protect him from himself. And so he's a blame shifter and he'll put the blame on them. And whether it's Giuliani or Powell or any of the others, they're all gone unless they are saying and doing only exactly what he wants, and it's effective. They need both pieces of that puzzle. So you've got four people in the room, one who's sticking up for his people, three, two of whom are trying to stick it to him for doing that, and a third who's watching this saying, hey, I'm young enough, I'm smart enough, I want that position in the future. I'm not going to screw it up for myself now because there's no upside for Rubio to say anything in that conversation. There's nothing to be gained because the only person in that whole conversation who talked about any substantive elements of a possible ceasefire was Zelinski. And when he did, I said, look, we had one in 2014. We were the third largest nuclear power in the world less than 20 years ago. And we gave that up in return for a U.S. negotiated and backed ceasefire, which Russia violated immediately. And again in 2015.
Well, you know, I'm reminded of a meeting at the Oval Office between Trump and Macron just a few days earlier. And when Trump misstated the facts, Macron was able to mollify him. In fact, he reached over, I don't know if you guys saw this, it was impressive. He reached over and touched him on the leg as if to be somewhat affectionate. Maybe that's the wrong word. Somehow that touched Trump well enough to avoid a reaction on the fact that Macron was correcting him on a major misstatement that Trump had made. And so the question I put to you, Chuck, and you know, Ben raised this, is could Zelensky have done better? Is there something he could have done to avoid, you know, this expression of anger and recrimination against him by both Trump and Vance. What would you advise, if you had the chance to advise him earlier?
The first lesson, which is the most obvious, and I think Ben will agree with it, don't go into that room by yourself. Okay? Bring Starmer, bring Macron, bring somebody articulate and knowledgeable on the history and the foreign relations aspects of this. And ideally, somebody that's going to have some credibility, some influence in that room. So don't go in there by yourself. That's not Zelensky's fault. He was led to believe that that conference was going to be one that was going to be productive and talk about a trade-off of mineral rights for ceasefire support. And ironically, now we're 2 weeks later, and that's exactly where we are. Unfortunately for Trump, because he's now negotiating himself into a corner, Putin has given him absolutely nothing. Trump has given away NATO, he's given away support for Ukraine, he's given away protection of Ukraine's territorial sovereignty, all of those things. He's gotten nothing in return for that. He has no leverage to get Putin to agree to a ceasefire at this point. And yet he's backed himself into a position that, whether it's his or his advisors or whoever's choice that is, he's now, if Putin says, take a flying leap, I'm not agreeing to any ceasefire. We've gained territory since the war started. Yeah, we've lost 100,000 plus people, but I got more. That's not a problem for me. So he has no recognition of the values, principles, or negotiating strategy of Putin. And I don't know that anybody in his camp does.
Would Zelensky have been better off, and some people have suggested this, by saying, look, very nice that we're having this pre-signing meeting, if you will, that you set up, but I would really rather not have live television. I'd rather it just be, just the 2 or 3 of us in a room where we can negotiate any remaining points, like the security agreement, without the the platform and the theatrics. Would it have been possible should Zelensky have insisted on that?
Zelensky has his people, and then there's the White House people. And usually for this kind of thing, and Chuck, you correct me if I'm wrong, or Jay, there's basically sort of like, we'll call them Sherpas, who explain sort of how it's supposed to go, okay? So somebody, because I do know that Lindsey Graham was talking with Zelensky ahead of time, at least, but there are actually sort of people who say, okay, what we're going to do, there's like a program, we're going to do this thing, we're going to do, remember like last time we sat in front of, and they took the photos, you and Trump by the fireplace, shaking hands thing, that's what we're going to do again, and they kind of walk them through, and then, the meeting on the topic will be on this, and the people who will be there will be that, it's all very, 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 well, let me put it to you this way. In a normal professional organization space, nothing is catch can. It's all, everyone understands what they're supposed to do, right? So there's one of two possibilities, at least it seemed to me. One is the pre-approach, so to speak, was badly done to him. Or alternatively, in fact, they didn't do what they said they were going to do, which was to just have this little shake hands moment like that, in front of the fireplace. And it got turned into this thing. So he had to kind of react on the spot with the cameras on. The way it looked to me, I'm just, just watching it, was that, the actual event was about 50 minutes long. You only see the little bit about 10 minutes at the end, but it was actually about 50 minutes long. I got the tape on Fox News. And the first part of it, 45 minutes, was the standard, hi, here's some pictures, thank you, Mr. President, for being such a support. I mean, it was all the stuff that you normally do, right? And then you have the most amazing thing, I think, is that you have a Polish journalist who says back in Poland, people are seeing the United States kind of seeming to lean towards Putin and are feeling very nervous about whether the United States is going to truly support us in Eastern Europe. And, do you have a comment on that? That was a kind of question that this Polish, which, by the way, no American journalist would ask that question, which tells you it's, the critique of the White House correspondence, right? But it's, to me, that was a most amazingly beautiful question, isn't it? I mean, it's like, let us know. Because Poland, Poland's been there. They had the Russians sometime, then they had the Germans the other side. They're going back. They got the Swedes coming down. They've been there. They've done that. They got a lot of T-shirts, right? Different ones from the different time period, different centuries, right? And that's when it looked to me Trump was lost. So Vance tries to jump in, and that's when the thing starts with the Vance thing. Because Trump was not up to the question. It was just like you could see his brain kind of, So that's the thing that when it switches, and then unfortunately Vance was not very good, and he ended up creating a diplomatic incident. I mean, that's the way it looked to me. I mean, I may be wrong, but that was the sense of not being very well prepared, and Trump not being able to answer what I would call is an existential question for Polish people.
Right, and for all of Europe. So
the other important piece, Jay, is, as we talked about, if you're Zelensky, you say, hey, we can't leave Europe out of this. They're directly affected. What he's not saying is, these are my allies. I want my allies, my real allies, in the room with me when we're talking about this, because they're going to live with the consequences of this too. That third side, the entire European Union, has to be part of it. And that's, I think, if there was a strategy that Zelensky had any idea where that thing was going to go, it would have been appropriate to insist on, no, the next step is going to be, let's get the European leaders in here. And then once we're all in agreement, then you can take it to Russia and see if you can sell it to your friend Putin.
That 10 minutes at the end of the 52-minute meeting was really crass. It was a violation of all diplomatic norms. My impression was that the press, all across the spectrum of the press, didn't like it. And public opinion was against it. And the GOP members of Congress said nothing. That's their role, to say nothing and be acolytes for Trump. And then you have this kind of, it wasn't right, but we're not going to do anything about it. Right. And then you go to Europe. And Europe had a completely different reaction. And indeed, as Chuck suggested, Ben, Zelensky immediately, after being unceremoniously thrown out of the White House without lunch, he went to Europe and tried to galvanize some support there. And he got support. And they met. And they promised him they would, support him with money, weapons, to the extent they had the resources. But my question to you, Ben, is how real are those assurances? Those countries don't have the resources the United States does, and they don't have the, what do you want to call it, solidarity as the U.S. could have. And so I'm wondering whether Zelensky made the right move and whether he got the reaction he wanted in Europe.
I mean, as a show of solidarity kind of moment, yes, he got that. It was really quite beautiful. But Zelensky's fighting a war, so he's like, okay, so what can you give me? One of the things I found really interesting is Macron, because he started to talk about the French nuclear umbrella operating across Europe, as opposed to being just a French one. The American umbrella been sort of the thing behind every one of our allies in the world, right? But there it was saying essentially the French were going to be the nuclear umbrella because of the threat of the Russians coming in. The question is also what kind of weaponry the Europeans can actually get to him. One of the nice things that Biden left him with was apparently months worth of weaponry for them to be able to continue fighting. But there are some other things, like, for example, there's something called Eutelstat, which is a French kind of Starlink thing that can transfer over to the French Starlink thing. What is the level of intelligence once the Americans froze the intelligence out? Once the Americans froze the military, there were literally planes on their way to Ukraine on that Monday that turned around because of the order. And then I heard recently, we talking about the military being started up again. But what I was understanding, some of the key airfields in Poland have been dug up. So it's like, it's really hard to fly a plane if you don't have an airfield to actually get it started out of. So I'm a little skeptical of the American, okay, we're restarting aid now that they cut the deal with regards to what happened in Saudi Arabia. But I think what would be interesting to see from Europe is whether the French, maybe the British, maybe the Germans actually propose troops to do something in Ukraine. If the Europeans did something like that, then you're like, okay, they're there. But no one wants to do that. There's a whole, but I think that Macron, in particular, is recognizing the existential threat coming from Russia. By the way, this 30-day ceasefire thing, I'm expecting sort of a delay, but kind of a delayed brutality from the Russians, because they always kind of go to the brutality thing, okay? And that they just use it to rearm, okay? That's all it is. It's just 30 days to rearm. It's not about going towards peace.
Trump throws Zelensky out of the White House, and he says, when you're ready to talk peace, give me a call, which is a very interesting negotiating technique, because Trump was the one who was not willing to talk peace, not willing to provide any security guarantees. So then there's this moment of reflection, I guess, where Zelensky calls him back or communicates to him, look, okay, and I'll do what you want. Just let's have, some kind of peace or truce or ceasefire. He relents. He softens. Zelensky makes the first move. Next thing you know is Trump has restarted the weapons, and he restarts support for Ukraine. And the next thing is the two of them, through proxies, are meeting in Doha to talk about the terms of this 30-day ceasefire. So they both came back to the table, essentially, within a couple of days. And I wonder where that fits in, whether that was a smart thing for Zelensky to do, Chuck, whether it was predictable for Trump to do, because he's made so many outrageous moves, and then within 24 hours, he's reversed himself. And that's what happened here, essentially, for both of them. Your thoughts about where these moves fit in the negotiating process?
The where question is a really good one, because the fact that they were designated to take place in U.S.-friendly territory in Saudi Arabia and UAE, that's U.S. design, that's U.S. control, that's U.S. initiated. I'm guessing that Ben's intuitive sense is right, that Rubio probably had something to do with it. He was there. He was a major player in those negotiations. They got back where they had intended to go, at least from what was stated in the earlier meeting. But they again did it, and here, my question again, They again did it without the participation or the presence or the forum in Europe. The European nations are the ones who were most directly affected by the consequences of Russia's invasive war and takeover in the Ukraine. They know that. They're still not at the bargaining table. So my question as a mediator, as a negotiator, is that's got to be part of the process. When is that going to happen? Trump, Rubio are intent on leaving Europe out of this and just negotiating with Russia, which puts Ukraine in the weakest of all possible positions.
Yeah.
If Europe were part of the negotiations, the playing field would be far less askew, far less tilted, in my view.
Yeah, it's the same thing as having all these people in the Oval Office and Zelensky's alone. Trump would like to avoid having Europe at the table because they would support Ukraine, at least at the table anyway. Ben, I wanted to ask you one other thing. This all happens against the backdrop of Trump's tariff wars, which, we can talk about that till the cows come home. But the fact is he was making threats. He was following through on the threats. He was reversing threats, and in a way, and still doing that even till today. And I'm asking for your final thoughts about this, but I'm asking that you consider that, because what he was doing is distraction. Again, distraction. He didn't come out very well, and I think in our collective opinion, from the meeting in the Oval Office, nor did he come out very well in the State of the Union speech, which was rambling and incoherent. And so what he always does is he brings some other news to the front. He tries to distract everyone. And so my question to you is that what he's doing here now, to distract, move the public attention forward to something else in order to make people forget the problems in the Oval Office?
What I understood from his first term is that his vision was that every day was like a new episode of a show, okay? And so you had to have like sort of an event of the day. Like, every show on TV has some kind of thing that happens during their hour-long episode. That's the way he thinks about what he's doing, coming from that background. So I think that the moves that he does are coming from more that than anything else. If he's not looking good over here, yes, let's do something else over here that's going to change sort of the storyline of the show. Like, let's go after the Canadians, right? Or let's go after the folks in Denmark or through Greenland, okay? I mean, it starts people thinking about other things. And, he dominates the news cycle. I heard that he did 100 tweets the other day, a couple of days ago. I mean, you just got to think about the President of the United States doing 100 of those true social things as part of his day. But here's the thing. It's, people talk about NATO, okay, in Article 5. There's an Article 4. And Article 4 is that if a state is feeling threatened, they could go into consultations. There's an argument to be made that right now, Canada and Denmark might invoke not Article 5, but Article 4 towards the United States. I'm not saying they're going all the way there, but they would say we're thinking about whether this is coming to a situation where we have to think about the pre-step before you actually invoke, right? So, and then on the other hand, certainly the instability of his approach seems to have spooked the stock market tremendously. And then I'd say that another part of it is that there is this situation where there are all these demonstrations that are picking up. Tesla's price has gone down tremendously. There's unrest. I know people fear that he's going to try to invoke the Insurrection Act or something if things get bad, but I don't think that he will do that, because I think the people who are doing these demonstrations are smart enough not to do violence. Okay, so I guess my last thoughts on it is that I think people generally around the world are on to Trump's game, and they are learning quickly, or they are in the process of doing counter moves that are very strong to his limited set of essentially doubling down approach. That's what I see the world doing right now. And whenever you push him too far, if you push him, he always steps back. He always steps back.
That's the way it seems to be. And I'm very appreciative of Canada, because he rotated, yes, 25%. No, I'll delay that. In the meantime, they said we're going to put a surcharge on electricity to 3 states, including New York, and we're not turning that around. We're giving you that surcharge right now. It's going to stick. So Canada is making a point right along the lines of that strategy.
Being married to a Canadian, okay, and knowing a lot of folks up in Canada, they said that the Canadians have 2 attitudes. One attitude is, I'm sorry. And the second attitude is, you're sorry. That's if you're watching, you're sorry right now.
Thank you for that. Chuck, your final thoughts, wrapping around all of this, and remembering too that every day Trump is out there firing thousands of people. Today, 1,300 people from the Department of Education. He's threatening Social Security and so forth. So he's got the headlines, as Ben says, every day. Your thoughts, your final thoughts.
Both of you have just nailed it. Hey, he's a one-trick pony in the sense of projection and distraction. That's his only tools and weapons. He was a bully with Zelensky. He tried to be a bully in foreign relations. That has not worked. He's now turned it back over to domestic, where he's able to get away with it because of his congressional control and the lack of any opposition by any Republicans with any effect at all. So he moves it back to the turf where his ability to be able to get away with that bullying is greater. How long that's going to last? That's anybody's question at this point.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll discuss that going forward. This is a reality show that is in full tilt. There'll be more every day. Thank you for that. Thank you so much to our co-host, Ben Davis, and our guest, Chuck Crumpton. I'm Jay Fidell, host of American Issues Take One, and we've been discussing Trump and Vance and the ambush of Zelensky and how, if at all, it has backfired. Thanks to our viewers for watching. We'll see you again soon for the next one. Aloha.